just realizing like, oh, we're doing this thing together and we're in this together and like we're excited to figure it out together.
That was really refreshing to be in a situation where I didn't feel like I had to pretend like I had all the answers.
There was a sense of like childlike play. Did we all just become best friends?
Hi, friends. Welcome to another Dreams of Education podcast with me, Kelly Tenkely, and my friend and co-host,
Michelle Baldwin.
Michelle, today we thought we would talk about this idea of having high expectations for kids and what that looks like in lots of different ways. One, what does it look like for kids to have high expectations of their own work? But then two, what does it look like for the adults in the space to have high expectations? And we had an experience a lot, and I've seen this across, it doesn't matter what school I'm in, I've seen this all over the place, where from one grade level to the next, teachers might be catching up talking, see a student that they had previously had their work in the next school year. And the comment of, well, they did much better work when they were with me. Their work was they're capable of so much more. I'm really surprised at what's happening. And we heard that at Anastasis as well from parents sometimes, where we would share a piece of truly created student work. It was all student created. And they would say, well, last year they had this project that was this beautiful project that was very polished and done. And this, it looks like they're regressing. And as we were talking about it, we were kind of remembering how different the process looks when it is totally led by students, rather than how often we don't realize how high touch we are in classrooms as educators and how much we shaped that final piece of work, that what the final piece you're really seeing is adult plus student, and how that changes things, but also the depth of what we're doing and what we're expecting as the outcome,
right?
How that changes. And so I thought we'd talk about that today.
I think there are quite a few things to bring to the forefront there. And again, I think a lot of times teachers don't realize how much influence and interference, and I mean that in a very positive way, happens when you're helping to correct students' work versus how much of that's actually internalized by the student. So a lot of times when, for example, if a student turned in an essay and the teacher corrected it, sent it back and said, okay, go fix this. Well, now you have a polished piece of work because the teacher helped correct it. And again, there's a lot of, as you said before, kind of high touch there by the adult. And now we see, oh, well, the kid fixed it. So now they must have learned that, but that's not necessarily been internalized yet. And I also truly believe
as a process that they can do by themselves.
Exactly. And they're not there yet. With the teacher's help, they can absolutely do it, but they're not independent yet. And I think that sometimes adults, including educators, forget how multi-layered writing is. I mean, learning in general is very multi-layered. And if we go into every content area, but we talk about writing or math skills or science experiments or any of those things, the layers of independence where kids are, and I'll just use writing as an example. We often talk at Anastasis about, let's just get the flow, just get your thoughts out, and then we will go back. And there are quite a few adults who forget that kids don't automatically correct their spelling as they're writing because they're trying to focus on getting their thoughts out. If I have them try to spell correctly as they're getting their thoughts out, they lose their thoughts.
And how many kids are hesitant to write because I don't know how to spell all the words yet?
Right.
Yeah.
So they may have these really great ideas that if I interfere and say, oh, that word's not spelled correctly, I've now interrupted that flow. So if we're talking about the 5 steps of writing, which you can argue about how many steps of writing there are, but for most in the K-8 area anyway, it's pre-writing and then planning and outlining and then writing your first draft. Those 3 things right there, most kids up even into middle school are not independent at all. They still need supports as we go through, let alone going back to read, revise, and then edit and proofing and all of those things. Sometimes kids don't even know what the difference is between revising and editing, right? So when we look at writing, for example, if you talk about high expectations, and you have, for example, maybe a fourth grader who was able to spell and write in paragraphs the previous year. And now in fifth grade, it's, a whole page of writing. There's no paragraph break. There are a lot of misspelled words. Grammar is incorrect, and we have some punctuation inconsistency. I would look at that and say, well, that's developmentally appropriate for a fifth grader, where the fourth grade teacher might have said, well, last year they knew how to do this. And I would say maybe not as much as you thought, because you probably were helping them along the way with that support.
And if they knew how to do it and it was internalized, they'd be doing it.
Exactly.
And I think that's the part that is like mind-boggling to me of they clearly didn't. I know you think they learned it because they performed it in the moment of time they were in your class, but they didn't actually learn it if it's not a skill that's transferring in a new context. That's not learning. That was performing, right? And that's different.
Don't you think too that's maybe a little bit of insecurity on the part of the educator?
I think so.
Partly.
On both parts, right? I think you hate hearing that when, as the fifth grade teacher, when you're like, did I break them? And I think that we need to give more grace in every direction, I think, because there is that sense of, oh no, am I a terrible teacher because they're not doing it this year? And it's like, well, no, developmentally, that's exactly what I would expect. Also knowing just how teaching and learning works. Like, yes, if you gave a project that was very well scaffolded and laid out, and you met with the student at every part and micromanaged, for lack of a better term, scaffolded that process and that learning, they probably came out at the end of that with something that was beautifully polished.
Right.
But look at how much adult
intervention
and interventions happened in that process, where in fifth grade, if the project was assigned, I know I'm thinking at Anastasis. So if it's an inquiry-based type project where we're asking them to do research and make connections and have this depth of understanding and actually be a change maker with like, I want to do something that matters with this piece of writing or this work, that's a completely different set of skills that are wrapped into that than here's a topic you're going to write on. It's going to have 5 paragraphs. I'm going to help scaffold. We're going to do this first and then this and then this, right? That's such a different set of skills that is happening in all ways.
It's a lot less formulaic, and that again turns things for kids into a novel situation. And now what they may have learned before isn't necessarily clicking for them, that I should still write in a similar fashion because it looks completely different. I think there's a lot of fear here, right? That not only from educators, but also on the part of parents where, oh no, my child has regressed. And to be honest, most kids are not regressing. I mean, regression in learning.
Because I agree.
Yeah.
Like if they've learned it, how can you regress? You've learned it, like you know it, you've internalized it.
But even if we think about like brains and how brains work, unless there is something really wrong, and that's again where the fear is, kids are not going to regress. I think we have this just very artificial understanding in general of what learning means. And again, because most kids do not get to go very deep with their learning, it's not really internalized as much as we think it is. So that student who is getting really good grades in writing in one class and then the next year is struggling, part of that is because of maybe teacher expectations.
Yes.
Right. And then also going back to, well, on a surface level, they were able to perform, as you said before.
Yeah.
Did they truly understand, or do they still just need more support as they go along in this particular process? And I think that's really the key there. But again, that fear is really the motivating part for people to speak up and say, well, if they did it last year, why can't they do it now?
Yeah. I mean, I heard a story, and I'm going to share it just because I think it illustrates it so well, of a student who is in a more innovative school doing like really interesting things, right? They picked a topic that they were passionate about that wasn't assigned, right? They got to choose anything. They did all of the work and the research to understand they were so excited about it that they put together this piece of writing to encourage other people to take a stand in this kind of social justice direction. And so excited about it that she made copies and then went and shared those copies with previous classes that she had been in. To me, I hear that story and I'm like, that's incredible. She cared enough about the thing that she was learning to dig deep, to write something, and then she was so proud of it that she went and shared it. The previous teachers were so focused on, she's regressed in her writing because there's errors all over it. This is not her best work. She could do so much better, without realizing the actual depth of real, like, meaningful learning that happened, that she was so excited about it that she wanted to share it with others. Now, the piece where I would say that we can come into a scenario like that is helping kids have high expectations and understanding the audience and the purpose of what they're doing. And the way that we would frame that at Anastasis, if a student brought that to me, right, and I'm looking at it, the first thing I would be like, this is incredible. Like, your voice in this is incredible. The passion and the care and the tender heart that you have, that you want to share this message, and it's an important message.
The research you did. All of it. Yeah.
All of it is so, like, this is brilliant. And because this is so brilliant and I want the world to hear this message, we need to care enough about the presentation and the spelling and how we're presenting it so that your beautiful message does not get lost by people focusing on the wrong part, right? How we talked about it at Anastasis all the time with the kids. It was like, this is, because it was brilliant. It was, we weren't even blowing smoke. Like, it really was, the things that they were doing were so incredible, and that they were putting language to it and that they cared about it. If all we focus on is spelling, punctuation, and presentation, I think part of the issue is we, in that moment, kill the love of learning if we're not helping them understand why those expectations exist. And we're just, well, this isn't good enough. Like, go back and do it again. I think that's where we miss that, the joy that is coming through the learning, the care that is coming through the learning. Now we're helping them understand, why do we like to look at a Nike ad or anything that we see in the world? Why do we like to read that? Who's your favorite author? Why do we like to read that? Would it be distracting for us if there were errors in it, or if they didn't care about the presentation, or, those kind of things? And so I think we can help kids internalize the expectations for themselves, that it doesn't have to be perfect the first time it comes out, but to care enough about, you clearly cared enough to go and share it. So, like, let's care enough to get help, like going through and editing or revising.
Well, and all of that is, like you said, that you're considering your audience. So a lot of times in my classroom, when kids were doing work, and I know we're focusing a lot on writing, and we'll talk about some other content areas as well in a little bit. We used vlogs a lot for kids to journal and share their morning pages or just their thoughts, or they were evaluating something or talking about a field trip that we went on. And
reflecting. Yeah, a lot of reflection, writing.
Yeah. And there were times when they would say, this is, they would have a phrase of, this has not been edited yet, but we wanted to get our thoughts out and share them. And on the flip side of that, I also, if I helped them edit something, including on their blog, that was a sentence at the bottom that this has been edited with Mrs. Baldwin. And I think too that
we wanted to be more honest about what the kids' the independent skills were, which is why we would put those notes in there, because we wanted parents to even understand, I don't expect a fifth grader to be able to do this perfectly and for it to look like this.
Right.
Because it's just not developmentally appropriate that it would come out with this, right? This is high touch adult, and that's okay. That's how the learning happens. But, like, to call that out so that parents understand that you shouldn't expect that next year they're going to be able to do what you just looked at, this polished piece, independently, because they didn't do it independently this year.
Well,
so
and
I loved that. I think you started that.
Well, I think a bunch of us talked about it and said, let's do this together. So that way parents are seeing this.
We started doing that.
And there was one point where I did have parents come in to say, and we don't get Friday folders anymore. And so the work that we're seeing now doesn't look as good as the Friday folders. And that's when I would have to say, you saw corrected work. Right now, you're still seeing if I'm doing morning pages with them or a journal, I am concentrating on what they're writing, not how they're writing.
Yeah.
And if it's
just getting them to love writing,
yes,
which they did, because we weren't doing everything as a polished, finished piece.
It was also a lot of the first times for some of them. And at that first year, I was teaching third, fourth, fifth graders. And that was the first time that for some of them that they'd been asked their opinion on what they were writing about. And that talk about a skill.
So hard.
It was. They kept saying, well, I don't know what you want me to write. And I was like, well, what do you want to, I mean, if this is this topic, what do you think about it?
What I want to write about.
But I don't know what's the right answer. And I'm like, if it's your opinion, there isn't a right answer here. Let's go. So that alone is a skill that they had to practice.
So much of that the first year, especially. And I call it out as the first year because that's the year we were having all the kids came from it somewhere traditional.
Right.
And so it wasn't part of the culture of Anastasis yet. It was being built in real time, but like the number of them that would melt down, and the junior high had a really hard time with that the first year because they had, at least 6-7 years of schooling, traditional schooling at that point. And so it was like, yeah, I joke, but it's true. Like, but what opinion do you want me to have was really a lot of how they would talk and ask questions. Well,
and then it even we got, a little bit deeper into what's the purpose of writing and what is the writing for which purpose. So I'm like, with what you're writing today, are you sharing a reflection, what you think about something? Are you writing to teach somebody something? So it wasn't just, we're going to learn about narrative and expository writing. Like, it wasn't like putting those labels on it, right? Yeah. It was more about, I want you to consider an audience. Who do you think should be reading this and why? And now write towards that audience. And again, if you're just going like, get your thoughts out, what are you going to do in the pre-writing stage? Sometimes I think even by calling it pre-writing and then planning and outlining, that still took away from, right? So it still takes away the flow. I just always said, get your thoughts out. I don't care what it looks like. Get your thoughts out.
I still, to this day, as I'm writing my book, there was no outline. That's not how I work. I literally I brain dumped all of it, just word vomited it all out. And then now I'm going back and I'm like, oh, what makes sense as a order for this to exist in? And so now I'm ordering it, and then I'll go back and start like revising and editing and all of those other pieces. But I cannot start with a pre-write web and then outline. Does not work for my brain at all.
And it's really great for
me up immediately.
For linear thinkers. Maybe it works that way. So for some of the kids that I would have, when I'd say just get your thoughts out, it was too overwhelming. So for some, it was freedom, and they would just sit and just, and again, most of this was handwriting.
Global thinkers.
Yeah. They would start handwriting and just get as much done. Like some of them would have pages and pages. And then I'd say, okay, let's go back and look at this now. Is this something that we're going to use that we want to just keep as a reflection, and this is good enough? Or do you want to go back and publish this at some point and then make this to a place where you have things organized by paragraphs? And again, looking at the skill level of the kids. Some of my students, like I said before, it was too overwhelming to just get your thoughts out. So I'd say, okay, let's write down some words that you think of when whatever topic it was. If you're reflecting on something, exactly. So just start writing down some words.
Remember about that field trip.
Exactly.
Write down the words that come to mind. Yeah.
And then we can go back and organize it. I always started the flow writing with paper and pencil. Mm-hmm. I thought that was really important to have that.
I think we did that all the way across, with very few exceptions when it was, there were exceptions to that rule, but I would say for the most part, it was always start pencil and paper.
Yeah, we had some kids with some sensory issues that they needed to be typed. But again, even for those kids, that it was get the flow out. Don't worry about anything else. Type this as you would write it. So when we look back at what those kids were able to do, I saw some really deep thinking, and that progressed I mean, it would get deeper and deeper as the year went on. And I had, kids throughout the different years at Anastasis really proud of them and calling themselves writers who would have called themselves writers.
So cool.
I had one student who called himself the blogmeister because he loved writing blog posts.
Yeah.
And it was super cute, but it was also, this is a kid who I was like, pulling 2 or 3 sentences out of him at the very beginning of the school year. And then towards the middle and end of the school year, he was super proud of his writing. But part of that is because he got to just sit and write rather than, that word spelled wrong.
And to have ownership and agency over his ideas and thoughts. And I think we forget that that's what writing really is there's an agency. You have a voice, you have a point of view, you have there's so much ownership that comes with writing. And I think we forget that when it's boiled down to, we're going to do a 5-paragraph essay this week. And here's how we do a 5-paragraph essay, right? And it's like, kill me now. I don't want to read them and I don't want to write them. But when the kids
it's too formulaic.
Yes. When the kids could kind of backward design that sometimes with the junior high, well, I think we did this in other classes too. I remember doing it with Deb's class, but having them focus on one part at a time in the editing process as well. So, going through and saying, today we're going to look at voice and we're just going to focus on looking at, do we see good voice and what is good voice, and using mentor texts that they were reading as class reads. You'd see those words or those that kind of voice show up. I remember when the kids were doing like Maya Angelou and they were studying that poetry, and suddenly you'd see that cadence of writing in everybody's, or when they were reading like Ray Bradbury, and then that cadence would come out, or that voice would come out more in kids' writing. But it was fun because they'd put all of their writing out, and they would, as peers, even go around and comment on the voice and word choice that they were seeing maybe one week, and just leaving sticky notes of, this word choice was amazing. Like, I really like that you use this word choice here. This could use a different word because I don't think it's getting your point across as strong. They would give each other really detailed feedback, which also, again, now you're looking for something specific that they're also thinking in their writing specifically about word choice and voice.
Well, and those gallery walks were great methods of helping the kids to see each other's work. And we did it with art. We did it with music. We did it with writing. We did it with
literally with everything.
Math problem. I mean, all of those things. But so I kind of want to address what you were talking about there with the mentor text. A lot of times with writing or big projects, and because Anastasis we didn't isolate content areas, we often had projects that kids were working on that required them to use multiple content areas and skills and concepts. So a lot of times, as you were saying before, with expectations, the first inclination is to go to a rubric and an exemplar. And I don't discount either of those two things, except for when they limit kids. And rubrics can be very limiting.
I think we like to fool ourselves that they're not limiting, but
they are. They really are.
They give a ceiling to something that you're like, we didn't get the best because they just are aiming for this, that box, that quadrant on the rubric.
And sometimes like parts of your projects and your writing could have, you can look and say, okay, well, this section of your writing, if we're just looking at conventions, well, we can give you a rubric for that. If you're just looking at voice, that's a little bit different. And again, when you look at exemplars, a lot of times when I provided kids for an exemplar for a project, I got versions of that exemplar.
It became a cookie cutter.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So when you're using mentor text, and I'll give you an example of that. When I was teaching 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade classroom, we were looking at poetry. And again, it wasn't just language arts. We were looking at it with, a scientific aspect, and we had brought music and art into it also. But when we were focusing on so many things, right?
I was like, there's pattern, like even math patterns of like what.
So the kids, before I just had them sit down and write their own poems, when we were looking at voice, for example, we started looking also at poetic devices and how different poets would use those poetic devices. Instead of me just delivering a lesson on here's every poetic device,
what personification means.
Yes. Yeah. So you've got, instead of having that passive learning where I'm delivering the instruction,
Or the way I got it, which was a worksheet that
right.
identified the personification.
Here's the definition.
Write one of your own. Yeah.
So we would look at, and we started with a video that was an animation of the Wordsworth poem, The Daffodils, or Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. Both are the same title. So we looked at that, and then we looked at several Langston Hughes poems and then some Christina Rossetti poems. And I said, okay, what are some things that you notice? And then the kids were able to kind of they went through with highlighters. They talked about it with pairs. We talked about it as a large group. And then they started saying, well, sometimes they'll, talking about the flowers or dancing. And then I was able to say, okay, this is personification. So we could then talk about what personification is after we'd already identified it, but didn't know what the name of it was.
Yeah.
All of that happened in a way where I'm showing, again, mentor text. We're learning about how each poet was using voice. We're learning about the devices that they used without, again, having to just sit and listen to Mrs. Baldwin yammer on about what these things are and then go look at them.
Right. And then make your own. Yeah.
Exactly. I think that sometimes when we talk about direct instruction, we make the assumption that maybe a class of 25, 30 kids, which we didn't have at Anastasis, but that, well, I delivered that instruction, they have, quote unquote, learned it, because then they demonstrated on a worksheet. Well, if I'm delivering that and it's verbal and sometimes I'm writing things on the board, I might have 2 kids out of 25 who are listening 100%.
Right.
Right. So are they really learning it and internalizing? That's a best case scenario, right? If they are actively analyzing things, looking at it, searching for certain things, then we talk about the definition, and then they start comparing it with other mentor texts. Now that active learning has them really, and my expectations are still very high. I mean, a second grader learning about personification in a poem is pretty high. Right. Yeah. However, now I've just changed how the kids are learning it, internalizing it, and working with it. Now, when they create their own poem, they're thinking about how can I use that device? And then we had an exhibition at the end of that particular, that was the end of that block. So that was how we express ourselves. And the kids wrote their own poetry. They did some painting. They added music to some, and then they shared it. We had they wanted to have a tea party.
Poetry cafe.
And they loved it, right? But and the poems were so good.
They were stunning.
Even kids who were still struggling with reading and writing were able to create poems. How much scaffolding I had to do and the support that I had to give to some of the kids versus others varied greatly. But again, we were able to do those things because the expectations were set in a way that everyone could be successful. Mm-hmm. Successful, did I say that correctly? And I didn't just deliver the information. So developmentally, it worked for every kid in that classroom.
And when we talk about differentiation, I can't overstate this enough. We are our differentiation didn't come in the form of the lesson necessarily. It came more in how we were looking at the end product and what our expectations were of each child.
And how much I had to support individual kids. And because I wasn't up at the front of the classroom delivering direct instruction the entire time, my support then was appropriate for each student because I didn't have to stop what I was doing to ensure that everybody was caught up, right? Yeah. Also, a lot of times what I see in differentiation is the amount of work kids are expected to do.
Yes. We'll just lesson,
right? Leveled worksheets. They don't all get the same worksheet. That's a lot of what when I used to help in staff development, teachers
3 math problems instead of 18,
right? Or you're working out of a different textbook. Then it still feels very artificial. Whereas with this particular example with the poetry, all of the kids were really immersed in the learning, and my work was a lot more of moving amongst them and asking questions and asking more questions.
Yeah. Well, and we relied so heavily on collective intelligence because what we knew is as the kids were doing that investigation and looking for the patterns or looking for, the notice and the wonders, they're hearing their peers notice and wonder different things than they are. Everybody is enriched in that process in a way that doesn't happen through direct instruction.
And then when it came time to actually do the poetry cafe, It was, okay, well, some of your poems have some misspelled words. Do we use punctuation the same in poetry as we do in writing a text that instructs somebody how to do something? So again, we're looking at different purposes of writing. Is it technical writing? Is it a recipe, for example? Well, no, it's very different. So how do I write a recipe differently than I would write a poem?
And it was fun as they started to see authors, they started to notice authors break conventional rules and the reasons that they were breaking what it did for the text when they broke some of the rules.
Right.
I can't remember who's the author that never uses a capital letter at the
E. Cummings, the poet.
Yeah.
And we did look a lot at
probably more than that, but that's but I remember some of the kids being like, wait, this is published, but it doesn't have like the punctuation. And it's like, yeah, why would that? Like, what does it do differently? How does it make you read differently? Yeah. So even helping them see that. And we did that teaching spelling too. We always think spelling has to be this direct instruction, memorize till you're blue in the face and then you'll suddenly know it. You hear people all the time, well, I'm just not a good speller. And you're like, well, why is that though? It could be because you're not good at memorizing, but it could also be because you've never been taught to recognize the patterns of language, or it might be, and there are rules of language, but gosh darn it, English just likes to break them left and right. The rebels that we are.
Every classroom, I think, except for the first year, we had a wall that was like weird. One class called it weird words, but another class called it rule breakers or whatever. And they got to decide what that was. And then every time they found a word, like people was on that every year, Piopal. But they would write it on a sticky and go stick it on that wall. And before we were recording, we talked about how sometimes, again, expectations of rules in math or rules in spelling or any kind of rules in learning, again, goes back to how many times are students reading the rules or listening to a teacher explain the rules rather than discovering them. I wish that we could agree in education that when kids are discovering things with a teacher along for the ride, I'm not just saying, independently
on their own,
right,
going rogue,
that there's so much more depth to the understanding when they discover things and then they are able to find, it's kind of like learning language too.
Yeah.
So an example that I had shared with you before was if kids are learning when a word is spelled with a G, if it's a hard G or a soft G, a lot of that is dependent upon the vowel that follows it. So I could stand up and tell the kids the rule of hard G and soft G, but it makes a lot more sense for me to say, sometimes G's are a hard G sound and sometimes are a J sound. I wonder what patterns we can find with that. And then have the kids searching for those patterns. Then they can create their own charts, or we could do it together on a wall in our classroom. And then after they've kind of come back together and said, oh, I noticed these patterns. I noticed that it's almost always a hard G when there's an A after it. Then we could also talk about those patterns and, well, are there exceptions?
Yeah.
So we go back to, this is how discovering.
Again, structured word inquiry.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
It was structured in that you set them off on a investigation with a question. They looked for patterns. They were the ones making the meaning,
right?
Which I think is so important because usually in a traditional model, we're the ones the educators are the ones making the meaning. So in that case, the kids are the ones making the meaning. And then you come back all together and you make sense of it together and you organize it together and you have the conversations and have the discussion about why you're placing things where they are or the justification of those decisions, which I think is huge.
Maybe I don't think I'm alone in this, but I very rarely like for someone to tell me or show me how to do something. I like to figure it out myself. If there's something I don't know how to do and I'm stuck and I need to ask for help, I'll do that, but I want to try it myself first. And that's partly because I'm curious, but also because that's how I learned to learn.
Yeah.
And I think it's how most kids learn to learn.
I was going to say, based on toddlers saying, well, let me,
right.
No, it's mine. Let me,
right.
How many of that is a developmental stage even of,
yes.
I want to try it. I want to be the big girl or the big boy, whatever that looks like.
Right. And if we push that away from them to the point where they get kind of a learned helplessness, we've had a lot of students, right? They've come up and they need to have their hand held the entire time. We've had those kids who always have questions that they could answer themselves, but don't, because they are so insecure in their own ability to solve a problem.
And I think, again, back to the expectations of the adults, sometimes we have created these artificial timelines, pacings, structures that we expect kids to be able to spell pretty complex words at a young age. And we do that because we're like, well, we'll just memorize them, which is how that's how I learned spelling. The problem is I could ace the test on a Friday. My spelling test looked great because I had worked hard to memorize it all week, but it didn't show up as spelled correctly in my writing the following week. And a lot of that is because I wasn't led through a process where I was making the meaning myself. It was like cram, cram, cram. Okay,
Right.
good. Now that's done. I got the grade and now I can move on. And honestly, spelling is one of those things that at least for me, took just practice of a lot of writing and correcting. And pretty soon you're like, oh, I don't want to correct that one again. I'm just going to learn how to spell because, right? Like you get to a point where you're tired of making the same mistake and it starts to solidify there because you've written it enough times, you've had the practice with it, or you are noticing it in other writing more often when you approach it the way that you guys all did, where it was that investigative process.
Well, and again, making meaning for yourself is when I'm spelling the word separate, I know that there's a rat in the middle, rat, because that's how I learned myself. I noticed that, and then that made meaning for me. And at, 56, I still remember learning that when I was a younger kid. There's a writer on Blue Sky that today he posted a picture of Jiminy Cricket and he goes, still thankful all these years for learning how to spell encyclopedia. And I was like, hey, that's me too. And we seeing what Jiminy Cricket sang in that little song because that helped us remember. Somebody helped us make meaning for that.
Stefani taught us banana.
But if I force kids that's the only way, it may not make a meaning for everyone. Right. So yes. I would find cute little things like, I think it was Electric Company did TION for shun. And it's like TION, shun, 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 shun. So I taught that to my kindergartners, right? They know that. But there wasn't anything for ING. So I just would hit the table and go, ING, ING, so that they would remember ing was ING. They made meaning of that. They changed it. They adapted it. I didn't change it for them. When they came up with their own things, because that was one thing I helped them to learn, they then made meaning of their own kind of spelling tricks. And not all the kids use the same thing.
I still sing 8. Old MacDonald had a farm. EIGHT. That's how I learned it. I could not get it right. My dad's like, all right, we're going to make a song. And then there's those words that I still spell judgment wrong the first time, every single time. The muscle memory in my fingers puts an E in there. Every single time. And I know it. I know it's wrong. And it still is just like muscle memory. So there's just those things that it's like we get so precious about certain things in education. And we forget that all of us had the process and all of us use spell check for a reason.
But you still have to use spell check. You have to at least get close to the word to know it. And that's the part that we've talked about with kids before too, is if I'm seeing students, I had one student that I didn't realize was mispronouncing words for a long time. He would go to spell truck, but he spelled it with CH, which for him, the way he was pronouncing it was correct. So correcting that took a while because it was like, does he not hear the difference between tra and tra? Because they're very close. And his parents didn't know either. So when you're looking at, and we can translate this exact same discussion into math facts, because when you start going back to, well, they'll just memorize it. Well, sometimes people have problems memorizing, but just memorizing doesn't mean that they actually learned it. And you can understand.
How many kids do we know that had their multiplication facts down pat, but had no idea why area was multiplication because they didn't understand what multiplication was doing.
They never used an array before. more. Or they would say, well, multiplication's easy, but division's hard. And I'm like, okay, you really don't understand multiplication then, because if that were the case, you would know your division facts too. If you're just memorizing sentences, number sentences versus I know the answer to this multiplication fact and I also understand it. Those are two completely different things. And when we go back to the high expectations, I'm not going just to be satisfied with kids multiplying and memorizing and not knowing how to use those numbers.
I think it's so funny that when we talk about high expectations, and I really think that that's what people mean when they say rigorous. I think they mean we'll have high expectations. I think we are so limiting in our what we call high expectations, which is, a number 5 on the rubric, rather than high expectations being, I care that you learn this in a very nuanced way so that it's not surface level. Like, I want you to have a depth of understanding. I want you to be able to make connections between other learning, between multiplication and division, between, pattern recognition and words. Like, that is a depth. The writing project that I talked about, right? The depth of learning that happened in that project, that is high expectations. Could we have higher expectations in the punctuation and those other places? Absolutely. But we can also help kids internalize why there's a higher expectation than just the depth of understanding that happened in that process. Why the expectation is more, because I care that you can share your ideas with others and that they can understand them in the intent that you shared them and join you in caring about this thing.
So that was making me think too, that as we worked on different projects at Anastasis, it was, again, helping adults, whether they were parents or other teachers, to understand that a multifaceted project, developmentally speaking, for students, depending on where they were in their learning and understanding, can look vastly different. And so if you assign a project that pulls in some science and some math and writing and research, that's huge. There's a lot happening there. The scaffolding may also include checking in with the kids to see, okay, today we're going to focus on just this piece of it. Because if you try to just give it all of it at one time, most kids,
correct,
or even just, do all the research, right? There's a level of understanding of what research fits the project that they're trying to do and what doesn't. And there were times when I got a rude awakening with kids that I thought were able to handle just the research part of it and were not. So I had to take a step back and say, okay, this group, you're going to go ahead and keep doing what you're doing. This group, we're going to sit here and talk about, well, if you're researching this topic, how do I know if this particular resource meets the need of my project? First of all, you have to read all of it. And that might take a really long time depending upon their reading abilities, right? So there's so many different layers of that. So just throwing, regardless of age groups that you're talking about here, just throwing, well, go research this topic or whatever topic the kids have chosen, right? And then come back to me and show me what you've found. And then to have check-ins, which might be, all right, just give me a summary of the resources that you found. And that alone is a huge skill. A lot of times when we look in more traditional models, the research part of it is the teacher has given texts, videos, whatever, and the kids are taking from that and then taking notes. Whereas if we said go research, it was go find some. And maybe I gave them a list of websites or books to read or library databases to search, but that didn't always mean that I was giving them exactly what they needed to find. And sometimes they're like, well, I haven't been able to find anything. I'm like, yeah, that's part of research. Sometimes you spend an hour and you haven't found anything that meets your needs. And again, depending upon the kids.
Goes back to the lie of efficiency in education and these, artificial timelines that we put into place that just aren't truthful and honest about how learning really happens out in the wild.
Yeah.
Because we know that there are times when we're curious about something and we're doing the research and there just isn't, enough
Right.
out there, or it leads us down a new path that like opens up new questions. Like, I think what makes all of that such high expectations is we're looking at higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. We're looking at analyzing and evaluating and creating, and there's all these higher levels where, an assignment that we've chosen the topic for kids, they're just doing the 5-paragraph essay.
With
That's
everything curated for them.
With everything curated for them. That's the remember, understand, like
Just it's
level.
Yeah.
And there's synthesizing, and you think about what we did with kids at Anastasis, we were really asking them to go through all those levels of Bloom's. That's what was the high expectations for us.
Right.
I think. I mean, we never said it really in those terms necessarily, but it seems to be what we did.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked also about Bloom's and depth of knowledge quite a bit, especially with some parents too, who were like, I'm not seeing the work I'm used to, and like that's because we're doing something that's a little bit deeper level thinking, and they're not just reading a resource and then paraphrasing and turning it back in. There's a lot more here. I read some professor was talking about students writing papers and doing projects at the collegiate level, the university level. And this particular professor said, I don't want you to turn this in because I need to know about it. He goes, I already know about it. I'm trying to figure out if you know and understand and can present this in a way that shows me your understanding. They were talking a lot about, kids using AI for writing and how the AI does the work and the thinking process and the learning. Sorry, it's not learning, it's just regurgitating. But if a student isn't actually doing the work there, then I don't need you to turn in an AI generated paper because I already know this. I want to see what you know, as well as your own thoughts about this that AI can't do for you. And I was thinking also about how that was happening at Anastasis. A lot of times I would tell kids, I do know about this. You're not teaching me something through this, or maybe you are. Maybe it's something I've never learned about, but I want to see your learning throughout the project. So that's where my high expectations were. And I want you to develop a project that helps me see what you learned.
Yes, absolutely. It made me laugh when you were talking about the using of the AI. Scott McLeod just posted on his blog, dangerouslyirrelevant.org, the vicious AI cycle. And he says, teachers use AI to create student work, the work that they're going to do. The student uses AI to complete the assigned work. The teacher uses AI to grade student work. The student dismisses work due to lack of meaning. And I was thinking, we said something very similar to that last week, but it's that if we want kids to get meaning out of this, to make meaning to all of those things. And if you're just having them do the lowest level of a writing assignment that has a topic already assigned, that they're not having to come up with something they're interested in and follow it, well, of course you can get AI to do that. I think much more interesting is what you're describing, which is I want you to think about, what you care about and what you're interested in and curious. And then I want you to go follow that. And then once you found something that you're excited to tell people about, I want you to know how to tell people about that. And I want it to be in your voice. And I want to hear your spin. That's harder to outsource because
it is.
You're making meaning all the way along.
And I think, again, there's a lot of disrespect towards kids and the kids feel it. And so if I'm a student and I feel disrespected that my teachers are just giving me some, BS assignments, I'm going to give BS right back to them. Right. Whereas if I find something that they're interested in, again, I feel like my job as an educator is know my students well enough that I can help them find something that they're passionate about and then tie it into whatever I'm trying to get them to do. Right. So if they're passionate about baseball, I can do physics and writing and art and history and math. There's so much, right?
Yeah.
It could be anything. So my job is to help them find a connection to it, to some content area that I'm trying to help them improve in and do some learning. Again, not all learning is exciting and we can't be passionate about every single thing that we have to know how to do, but I can still make it interesting if I work with the kids. And that's where I think the low expectations of kids actually are what are boring kids.
I know. I was going to say, it seems like for all our talk of rigor and high expectations, our expectations are actually the lowest level of expectations that we could have. I wonder how many teams talk about what it means to have high expectations as a team, because I know we did that a lot of like during our professional development, just, you know, asking the question of what does high expectations look like and having that dialogue, because it does look different from, you know, teacher to teacher and person to person, what we think about. And it was an important conversation for us to have as far as, you know, when we say that we have high expectations at Anastasis, what does that look like? What does it feel like? What does it mean here? I wonder how many teams even ever have that conversation, or if they assume that everybody has the same definition or.
Yeah, I think that alignment has to be not identical, of course, but even having the conversation so that you can get people kind of on the same page, but just even thinking about, well, who's doing the work? You or the student, because whoever's doing the work is doing the learning. We've said that numerous times on the podcast, and we said that at school all the time too. But helping teachers, because I know that I needed that reminder a lot. I feel like several teachers that I know, including myself, when we get stressed out, anxious, overwhelmed, whatever, we resort to the things that we used to do. So our bad habits.
Are easy.
Right. Or what's easier. Yeah. Right. And for me, that's always talking.
I also know, and this is going to be so revealing, but me as the pleaser that I am and the empath that I am, when I was a new teacher, I was so hesitant to hold high expectations for kids because I didn't want to crush their souls. I didn't know how to deliver that in a loving way, like we learned to do at Anastasis, of like saying, you know, this is such a brilliant piece. We want others to know and read this brilliance, and let's not put anything that hinders. It's such a different thing than like, you could do better, you know?
Well, it's not your best work.
It's not your best work, or, you know, you have this many errors. And so I think I had a harder time holding that line as a young teacher, just because one, I hadn't learned it as a skill probably yet. And two, I think because I am a high empath and I didn't want to, I don't want to crush your soul. And I know that they're doing the best they can sometimes, you know, but it wasn't meeting the curriculum expectations or the standard expectations. So it probably got easier as we were at Anastasis as well, because our expectations could be personalized based on the student.
Right.
Where in a traditional system, I didn't have that flexibility. Everybody was held to the same high expectation.
I just always think it's easier to teach or to tell or show a kid how to do something rather than to help them discover it themselves. And a simple example, we go back to spelling, is how do you spell blah, blah, blah. I would always ask at Anastasis, well, how do you think it's spelled? Sound it out. Let's start together. And I had one student that probably several students, but one that spoke out and said, I hate when you do that. It's really frustrating. I just want you to show me. I just want you to tell me, and then I'll know. And I'm like, I could do that, but then I don't know what I need to help you with when it comes to spelling. So when you try to spell it for me, then I can help you. But if I spell it for you, then I don't know what your understanding is. And that's the whole reason why we didn't do homework, because I could see what the kids were doing and where I needed to help them. Whereas if it went home, I didn't see the process. And I think, again, when we start looking at, you said before, I care enough about kids to hold to the high standards and the high expectations of them. And it made me think about how many, this happens at the university level, but also in K through 12, where there's kind of a understanding that there's a bell curve, that there are going to be kids who fail.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's
just to build that into the system.
And how wrong is that? We don't have kids at Anastasis who failed at Anastasis because we didn't allow them to.
Right. Yeah. And we've said this in a previous episode, but when you look at them on paper, as far as like IQ and like a full battery of testing for a 504, an IEP. And when you looked at their testing, and if that's the only thing that you knew about that kid, your expectations would be so, so low. And what we know, because we've worked with those kids, is they're capable of so much more than what those tests show us they're capable of. And shocked us it shouldn't have shocked us, even in the last years, but it still surprised me sometimes what these kids could do. And they were the hardest workers and did so much more. And it just makes me sad to think, how many kids are held back in their learning by artificially high expectations, a false sense of I've done the best because I got the score, because I, got this quadrant in the rubric checked and could have done more.
Mm-hmm.
How many kids are held back because we have this box of expectations that are limiting for them?
Right.
It really makes me sad how many people we just assume aren't capable.
And that doesn't mean that we push people beyond their abilities or where they are right now. We always look at, we're just going to move you forward, and how that goes is how it goes.
What's the next forward
exactly
step? Yeah.
But I look at that and say, okay, but I still have high expectations, because I'm not going to limit what I see as possible for this particular child, regardless of how they come to us. And when we see kids that surprise us with the depth of understanding of very kind of adult emotions, sometimes when I look at, you understand people's sorrow better than most adults do, and you're 6, right?
Yep.
Being able to talk about that at a level that is very unusual for a very young child. Those kind of things, again, if I'm in a traditional model, I don't even know to look for that, because we're not concentrating on those things. Whereas here, we're like, every student can learn. We're not going to give them a ceiling. We're going to give each student the support that they need individually and go forward from there. And because of that, that's where a lot of strengths came out from kids that we didn't always expect it from.
And confidence in their own abilities, because nobody's sitting there telling them that they're not good enough all the time. How many kids came to us with really, really, really low self-images academically because they had come out of a system that was, told them that they were not good enough through grades, through scores and things like that, or being held back or whatever it was. And then how many of them, after coming through where we're only focused on growth and forward progress, we're celebrating that along the way, we're naming what is best about who they are as people, the confidence that they came out. I mean, it's one of the things that a hallmark of an honest ASA student, they know who they are, they feel good about who they are, and they are really good at self-advocating, and they know that they can keep going. That was really what we saw out of every single student who left us. And we had students who would be labeled, severely in their IEPs as not going to be able to, do what they did. We also had kids that were gifted, talented, and showed as way above grade level. And so it just boggles my mind why. I mean, it doesn't, because we're doing the easy thing, we're doing the efficient thing in most standard models, but it makes me sad that we limit our ideals of what people can do so much. Even listening to the telepathy tapes and how much nonverbal autistic speakers get labeled as certain things, and so we just don't educate them because we make the assumption that they're not going to be able to learn. And the reality is these kids are brilliant, and we're actually the ones boxing them in and holding them back, instead of holding it all loosely and assuming that they could do it.
I will always put my foot down and say, every child can learn, no matter what.
Period. Yep.
And if you are going to be an obstacle to a child learning, then you need to get out of the way, because every child can learn.
Educator.
or be in charge of
You're probably
education
not.
or
I
making
was
laws
gonna
about
say, probably
education.
not the person listening to this podcast if
No.
that's your stance. But yeah, it really does make me sad when I hear, and I've sat in IEP meetings with lovely people who, you know, they've been trained a certain way, and so they're delivering news to parents in very particular ways. And I'm like, oh, I don't believe that I don't
Yeah.
believe that that's the end point for them, you know?
Right. Well, and even just to think about like how IQ tests are very biased and they are not accurate in what a child is able to do and know and do, but also that it's not fixed. Like there's been this really, really
We
unfortunate,
saw that in real time at
right?
Anastasia.
The theory that, you know, your IQ is fixed and that's never going to change is absolutely untrue. We've seen it. There's also tons of research
We
around
saw
the
it in
world.
their
Yeah.
IQ scores.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
yeah.
So just to know that and to then
Well, and again, that there's so much at play that's more than what we typically think of as academics in how somebody is performing academically. We talked about the social emotional. We talked about trauma. We talked about, do they feel safe? Do they have food? Do they have base needs met? Like all of that plays into it.
Right.
And so it's so unfair to limit without understanding the whole picture of what's happening and then providing the ability for more. And how many Hollywood movies, like that's the arc, right? Is the underdog makes it. And it's just somebody who believed that they could do it and help them have the confidence they could do it. Like we love that story. It happens in so many movies and books and TV shows. And yet when we're in the classroom, we like forget all that and stick to the curriculum and stick to the...
Right. I mean, there's at least 50 years of research about neuroplasticity and knowing that brains are these amazing, incredible organs, and that if we know more about how brains work, we should be doing better in education. And again, that's another hill I will die on. I don't think that the classroom model of sitting in rows and doing worksheets or this, I mean, if I look at a classroom that's other than computers and some technology, if it looks very similar to what I was doing when I was in school, then, and I'm 56. So we need to say there should be some things that are different. And a lot of what we know is that kids don't always work well in isolation. And the fact that we have kids competing against each other in school, that's ridiculous. Why aren't we helping kids realize that collaboration is a skill?
Right. And teaching kids that learning is a zero-sum game.
Right. I know.
Like, it's so bad.
And why do we do that? Well, it's competition to get into universities and GPAs and all. I'm like, okay, but then even if that were true, even if that's the case, okay, why are we doing it in elementary school? Why are we doing it in middle school? Why are we doing that all the way through when kids really need to be learning with and from each other and developing relationships? And I will say that I think that we know, just because we've seen it, we have proof that when kids learn it doesn't completely dissolve all conflict, but discipline issues in a school where kids have learned to work together versus ones when they're pitted against each other in competition.
Yeah.
Far different.
Vastly different. Yeah.
Yeah.
And even the way they play, I mean, we got to see this firsthand watching our kids, Anastasia's kids, play on the playground, and the way that they interacted and the way that they helped each other and the way that they did things and multi-age and all of those things was vastly different than kids who were in a very structured, strict academic competition-based system, and then watching how they played and it was literal fist fights that we saw. Like it was a lot of arguing. It was a lot of like, I think that we don't realize how much what we do in classrooms shapes behavior outside of classrooms, and that when we are in that competition, zero-sum games in the classroom, it trickles everywhere else.
It's so funny that we're talking about high expectations and also looking at that doesn't mean that we're stronger and less forgiving, more rigid and more authoritarian, because that isn't actually a high expectation. It is the lowest level of life.
Right. You can't
to
do
follow.
it. So
Exactly.
I'm going to have to,
right?
to control and
or I'm
Yeah,
going to
you
follow
comply.
directions to a T. That takes no thought process. Being
Well, there's
told,
no freedom
right?
there,
And if
right?
you don't learn to managing your freedom, it's so funny to watch memes about adults, right? Especially like the 30 to 40-year-old people who they're that's like millennials, right?
Hey,
But there's so many funny adulting memes about how, like, I think you even posted something about how I'll read more if somebody just gives me a Pizza Hut pan pizza and or something like that, right?
I thought it was funny. I don't need
No,
help
I know you
reading, but I
don't, but
would very much like to be rewarded with a pizza every time because man, I'd be eating that personal pan pizza and a Dr. Pepper.
I think it says
I'd
a
have so
lot.
many.
I think it really says a lot about our culture and how, because they're funny memes, right? And I know a lot of people that in that age group, my kids are in that age group, and they are very independent, and I'm very proud of them. But I do think it's kind of interesting how if you've spent essentially, 13 years of your life being told what to do at every second of the day, you're not allowed to make any choices. And if you do, you're in big trouble. And you are rewarded for being compliant.
Yep.
I would say adulting is actually going to be a very rude awakening and harder to handle because
And we've actually seen that also
yes,
of people who have come out of that system, and hiring is hard. Like as somebody who has hired people is really hard because you have so many people who everything they did was micromanaged all of their life to the point where they don't know. I mean, they're not good in anastasis as an employee because that's not how we do things there. Like it's
right,
not how we do things with students. It's not how I worked with you all. And I think about how many employers are saying the same thing of it's really hard to find somebody because I don't need a button pusher and I don't want to micromanage people. I want
right.
them to see a problem and fix it and come up with solutions or be creative or whatever it is. But we don't need the compliant. We have the computer to be compliant. We have AI is plenty compliant.
I saw a video about, it was a parenting video, and this woman was talking about teaching her toddler to be a problem solver instead of a problem finder. And I thought it was really interesting because, again, that's something, I think both are necessary skills. But if you only do one and not the other, then there's an imbalance there. And so for her example, it was like if the toddler spilled his drink on the floor and then screaming, "Mommy, I spilled," right? That's the problem finder. And she will, go in and say, okay, now what do we do next? And so helping him to think through so that the next few times he might still yell at and scream that he's done this, but he also knows how to take care of it himself because he can.
Yeah. Well, and you want the problem finder as well,
Yes.
because you don't want the toddler that spills it and walks away, and a
Right.
week later you find out there was
right.
spilled milk in the
Yeah.
carpet, and it
But
is a
that's
rude awakening because that's what it smells like.
everything about that. I was like, yes, please, because that's also what we were teaching incrementally throughout their time at Anastasis. If they came to us as 5 and 6 year olds, that was something that we would expect them. You're going to be self-sufficient. You're going to carry your backpack to your classroom by yourself. Mom or dad doesn't need to help you every time because you're a big kid. You can do this. And then also assigning little jobs in the classroom and helping them to see that this is a community, and in a community we take care of each other, we help each other,
We have roles that we play.
we don't point fingers and blame, we help solve the problems. And in those little micro communities in the classrooms made into the bigger community at Anastasis, that was the expectation all of the time.
Well, and even the number of times you said to kids, do you need me to solve this problem? Or do you think you can solve it?
Yeah.
Because they default to the adults going
Right.
to solve the problem
Right.
in a behavior issue or in a, like, whatever it is, right? And so it would be like, do you need, an argument on the playground over how the rules are working? And so were really good at that. I think the rest of us patterned it after you saying, do you need me to solve that problem? Or do you think that you can find a solution? Do you need help finding a solution, right? If they clearly couldn't because they had blown their lid and were dysregulated. But it is a remarkable difference seeing Anastasis kids in the world versus other kids in the world.
Well, and that starts with something as simple as I need a pencil, right? First of all, I was like, oh, awesome. And then it was, well, can you get me a pencil, Mike? And that's when I would say, I wonder if you could figure that out yourself or if you need me to do it for you. And then they would, and again, like 5 years old, they're like, I know where the pencils are, and they would go get it. And so being really super consistent with that kind of thing then translated into there's a conflict that I'm really needing help with. And then they could make that choice. And a lot of times when I did have to intervene, it might be something really small. And I could ask them questions and then they could solve it themselves. I'm like, see, you didn't need me at all. So standing there physically, that is the support that they needed at the time. But then they also heard me say, you didn't really need me because you just solved this. And I think that's an important piece. Again, I know we keep talking about expectations all across the board with reading and spelling and writing and math, but it also became to behavior and emotions and managing all of those things. And our students learned to do those things because we were consistent across the board as a school in our expectations.
And, we used inquiry at every step of the way.
Yep.
Every part of it was inquiry. What you just described was inquiry, what we were talking about, right? So it was not just consistent across the board expectation wise, it was also consistent in our approach to those moments where it wasn't, I'm just going to direct instruction you where the pencil is, right? Or I'm going to solve that for you. It was the inquiry of, cool story. I wonder where the
cool story, bro.
I wonder how you could solve that.
Well, and what I also,
Nikki always said, good story. How do you think you could do that?
Sometimes
I wonder what that could look like.
Sometimes the lesson was, if Mrs. Baldwin solves it, you're not going to like the outcome. Because now it's my decision and you may not like what my decision was.
Right. Now, but that's even helping them understand I'm giving away my agency by not investigating this further.
If you can't come to a decision on the rules of this game, I'll just take the ball and you can't play the game anymore. And they didn't like that decision. So the next time, it was like, no, I think we can solve it. We're good.
We don't need you.
We don't need you. We're good.
I don't think we are intentional enough in education at realizing how truly interconnected all of these pieces are, because we keep going back to relationship and culture, but we keep saying, I think we said this before, and it's because it's all so interconnected. Yeah. And for us, inquiry is not a pedagogy that we just apply to academics. It was what we were doing consistently all the time. It was our way of being at Anastasis and our way of becoming at Anastasis. And so it's like that, I think, is why it makes us so crazy when we hear like, well, inquiry doesn't work. It's not just that kids can't learn that way. And you're like, well, fundamentally you didn't set any of it upright, because it's all, if you're doing inquiry well, it's all connected. Right. So all of the pieces would have been in place, and you yourself as the educator would have inquired enough into, well, I wonder how my classroom needs to be set up. Right. I wonder what assessment might need to look like. I wonder what high expectations look like in light of inquiry. Like, I don't know how many are really doing all of that and seeing how it's all interconnected and it's the connective tissue.
Well, and sometimes it was even, I remember I had some educator friends who would say, well, the subgroup of kids that you had, it worked for them, but it wouldn't work for every kid. And I'm like, that could be true. But I also want you to look at, when I have a student who has an executive functioning issue, that's something that I know that kid needs more support from me and I can help. How many times did we see report cards of the past when it came down, like, to hear all the grades, but then you'd always say, oh, Michelle's tote tray is always messy, implying that I was either lazy or disorganized or just a messy kid, instead of going, I wonder why her tote tray is messy. Is it because she's taking every last second she can to finish the books that she's reading and then is in a hurry to get stuff in the tote tray and leave for the day? What is the actual, what's the reason behind it? And we know that we had kids that had executive functioning issues that we needed to help one step at a time, right?
Yes. The shedders, we called them. They
Right.
shed everywhere.
Right.
all their belongings just end up in random places. But again, that goes back to relationship, to knowing kids well. But that was us in our first inquiry of the year as educators, is who are the students, right?
Right.
So it still is, to me, it's still inquiry. It's us doing inquiry, living inquiry. It's us being very intentional about the relationship. It's us, the consistency, the expectations that we had, how we were approaching things. And not to say it always was perfect or we always did it perfectly. Like you said, we got tired and cranky and had hard days where we'd default and say,
the kids did too.
Nobody's talking at lunch today because we can't handle the noise level, right?
You must all whisper.
I think I only did that one time, but there was a distinct time I remember walking in there and being like, all right, silent lunch. We're going to just have lunch because Miss Tenkely has a headache and I can't do it today. So it's not to say it always went perfectly, but I think that even in those imperfect moments, we were pretty vulnerable with the kids of, I'm cranky today. I don't know why, but really the banging on the table is too much for me today. I know you did it yesterday. I know nobody else in this building cares about it, but I'm here today and I care about it. So I needed to but we would talk those things through with kids in the imperfect moments as well as the times that was going well. And I think that went both ways, where the kids could say, yeah, I don't know, I had a really hard morning. And so I need to spend the first 30 minutes of the day in the peace corner in the office with nobody bothering me. And then I want to call my mom so I can apologize so that I can move on with the day. Right. We had equal amount of those moments, but kids felt free to do that because they saw us doing that as well.
So I just use the same, I watch my granddaughter every once in a while. She's 3.5, almost 4. The other day she was just melting down and I could not get her out of it. And I'm, starting to lose it myself. And I finally said, do you want to, we can't call mommy and daddy right now. Do you want to send them a text? Okay. And so I said, okay, I'll type it in here. You just tell me what you want me to say. And so I sent them both texts. And then after that, everything was better. I'm like, I used to do that with students. And I'm like,
it was students too. And even if the parent didn't respond, just knowing that they could say the thing that they were holding on to was huge. Yeah.
It
we
was.
did that a lot.
It's interesting to me that we went through all of these government mandates like No Child Left Behind that left more kids behind than ever, right? Because there was nothing in No Child Left Behind standardized what every kid was going to do and completely left the child part out of it. So what we standardized was the curriculum and the delivery in many cases, instead of looking at what each kid needs. And I look at anastasis, and as I said earlier before, we didn't really have kids fail because we didn't let them fail. We didn't approach it as, oh, sorry, you're not working hard enough, because that really wasn't the case. Did kids slough off? Yes. Did they kind of get to be in that slacker phase? Of course they did, because they're kids.
But at the same time, our energy ebbs and flows as adults.
Right. Yes.
There are times when I cannot make myself go do the workout that I know I should be doing, even though I have the time to do it, because my body just doesn't feel, or my brain, I'm reading and I don't feel like it, and the sun is out and I'm gonna, so I think that we hold kids to expectations we don't hold ourselves to.
Yeah, for sure.
We know that there are times in our work life where we're not doing our hardest, best work at every moment, because it's much more fun to stand around and laugh with your colleagues and be silly.
Right.
And that's also okay. But we do not give that grace to kids. And it's so absurd because we're human, and humans have rhythms just like everything else. And our energy ebbs and flows. And some days we're on it and we're super productive. And other days it's a full moon and bring me all the chocolate.
It's interesting about what you just said too, is I feel like the expectations of kids, as you just said, are not the same as how we expect adults to function. But because there's such a high level of control in how most people approach training children, educating children. And I know for a fact, because every time I tried to control the situation, it was a huge fail. And we talk a lot about, Right. We talk a lot about our successes on the podcast, but we had a lot of failures too that we could look back and say, "Oh yeah, that did not work at all, and it blew up in my face." And every single time I tried to control a situation, either with my voice and sounding, more firm or stern than I actually meant to be, or with the activity or taking away kids' freedoms, if I tried to control them, it always blew up in my face. When I gave them more human treatment. I mean, that's a dumb word, but when I viewed them as they're also humans, they also have a full range of emotions. They don't want anybody putting their thumb on their back because they would love to be able to have some autonomy here too. When they learn to manage their freedom, I was able to step back and control a whole lot less. And that's when those kids really flourished. And kids always will rise to the occasion if they don't have something else going on that you're completely ignoring and expecting them, well, get that essay done. I don't care that you didn't sleep last night, right?
And it's true. It doesn't always go well. I think the more honest we got, like I said, in those moments when it wasn't going well and sharing with kids, like, I'm tired, I'm cranky, I don't know why. I mean, I would start the day. We started the day with 2-word check-ins a lot at Metanoia of just like, how are you showing up today? And I led a lot of those Metanoia, and I would say to the kids, like, I didn't sleep great last night. I'm kind of tired. Like, should we just put some music on and like put our feet up the wall and just have a peaceful metanoia this morning? And the number of kids that were like, yeah, me too. Like, I could use that too, and just be quiet. But showing up as a full range of human, being able to, in the moments when it did not go well and we were trying to control, or we took everybody's privilege away because we had just had it. And it's not how we would have shown up in our best moment. It's how we showed up in our worst moment, right? Where it's like, now everybody loses this privilege. You're all sitting here. You're all doing whatever. Most of the time, it was more about me than it was about the kids. And the difference that I felt in those moments from being in a more traditional setting where the mindset was more fixed in general, I could come back and at least restore that relationship and say, yeah, that wasn't my best. I recognize it wasn't all of you. I couldn't pinpoint who it was. I was frustrated, and that's why I took it away from everyone. Like, not my best moment. I can't rewind and figure out who it actually was, like who actually needed to be removed from the situation in the moment. Like, I didn't show up as my best. I'm sorry, for how that went and that it wasn't fair for all of you.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that kids hear the adults in their lives be honest about those moments and not just, well, I'm the adult and this is what's happening.
Right. And how
the version I got growing up.
How to make it better and how to show that you're truly apologetic and you want to do better next time, and modeling that for the kids. I can't expect kids to apologize to each other if I'm not apologizing to them in a regular fashion, right? And looking again,
and this is the high expectations for us as adults, right? For ourselves as the adults in the situation. Like, how are we holding ourselves to high expectations? What does that look like? And at Anastasis, high expectations meant owning our stuff when we needed to own it,
And just caring enough to want it to be better. I think one of the worst things that you can say to a kid is, I don't care that blah, blah, blah. If it's something that's meaningful to them. Like, we would often have kids would come to school and say, I'm not finishing this because I didn't sleep last night. And in a previous school system, I would have said, you still have to do it anyway, right? Rather than,
I don't care that you didn't sleep well last night because this is the expectation.
Or I hate to admit that I said things like that. Like, well, neither did I, but I'm here, so you got to do it too, right? Just stupid things like that. And I said that to high school kids.
I know. And again, it's when you slow down and recognize how normalized that is just in society.
Right.
And I think about all the time, because we talked so intentionally about it at Anastasis and I was surrounded by it intentionally. Then when you would go to the grocery store or things and you'd hear parents talking to their kids and the kids talking back, or siblings talking to each other, you just overhear and you're like, gosh, we're so not loving to each other a lot of the time in the language that we use and how we're speaking to one another, because we're trying to control it or we're doing things in a way that doesn't make
Yeah.
better for anyone. And you're like, gosh, if like mom or dad, if you could lower your voice, and not stop touching that, stop, and I know because we did it too. Like you just
Right.
get sick
Same.
of it and, you're like, stop it, knock it off. And then you see those parents who are like, do you notice that your little brother is crying right now? Oh, you do. Okay, well, he's going to need some of our attention. Can you hold that question for just a minute? And it's not easy in the moment to do that because you're reacting and the stakes feel high and all of the things. But when you see the difference in how all of that gets navigated with parents who can do that, and I know that even those parents probably can't do that
100% of the time. Yep.
But it's so different from the mom saying, or the dad, I say mom because I see moms shopping a lot, but saying, don't get that out of the cart right now. We're not doing that. We're not. And it's like, oh gosh, like it's so harsh. It feels so harsh when you're seeing it.
Are you sure that wasn't me shopping with my husband? Because that happens at my grocery store a lot.
It probably, as I was saying it, I heard it and I was like,
I'm like, John Baldwin, get those Oreos out of the cart right now.
And sometimes it's the people who are hearing how I'm talking. And then when you think about it though, Michelle, you're like, how many of us have those internal dialogues and that's how we talk to ourselves?
Yep.
I realized can be so much more loving and gentle to others and kids and the other people I'm talking to than I'm able to be with my internal dialogue with myself. And it's like, gosh, we need to just be, those voices get in there and then they're there. So like, how do we help each other out a little bit to realize like, oh, we all make mistakes. We all mess up. We all do the things.
I did a personal activity exercise of how many times do I tell myself I'm stupid or that was a dumb mistake or whatever on a daily basis. And when I started getting over 20 in one day, I was like, I need to be kinder to myself because again, I can be gracious to other people, but when you get into that, I'm overtired, overstimulated, whatever, your reaction is that first way that you talk to yourself is probably going to come out to other people too. And as I learn more about how all of the things that add up to how I am and who I am, those are the things that I'm like, okay, that's something I need to work on for myself so that I can be better for other people and to myself. I mean, I think a lot of us have a really hard time, especially for pleasers, especially for people who like to achieve and be there for other people, be of service, right? We are totally okay being super harsh with ourselves as long as it doesn't show up to someone else. And I think we need to really adjust that. And maybe it's an expectation where your own expectations for yourself are too high, that you need to give yourself a little grace.
Well, because a lot of times when we have that perfectionist thing, our expectations are perfection, which we know is impossible to meet at all moments of every day. Like this is just common sense. And I like the role of the observer of like, okay, if I'm observing like my thought patterns or how I'm talking to myself, if I can just like stand back and observe, I'm like, gosh, I'd never say that to a kid.
Right?
I'd never say that to my husband. I'd never say that to my friends. Right. And when you can step into that role and you're like, well, what would I say? And you're like, well, of course you messed that up. You've never done it before. You've never been this version of you before. Rob Bell says that all the time of like, well, of course it's hard. You've never done this version of you before. This is a new version of you. Like you've never been here before doing this thing. And you didn't do it today. Even if you did it yesterday, like
it's different
today.
There's a lyric in a Karen Carpenter song, and I love Karen Carpenter. She's like one of the best female voices of all time. But the song is, I know I expect perfection of a quite imperfect world and fool enough to think that's what I'll find. And I was just singing that song as like a little exercise the other day. And I was like, wow. So it's not just in the world itself, but of yourself. And it's just like, just chill.
And it does make it easier to then have that external,
right?
The way that you interact with kids, and just to get curious, like, okay, what was just happening that like burned this dinner that I've made 10,000 times. Like, where was my brain, right? If you can get curious about it, you're like, well, of course you burned it. You were thinking about the 18 other things you're trying to do at the same time. And you weren't in the moment with what you were doing. Like, of course that's how it went. It couldn't have gone any other way. And like, you can still be pissed off that your dinner's burned, but like, think about like the grace of course that's how it went. Look at all of the other things that were going on at the same time. Or of course, because you're just human and sometimes that's how it goes.
It's so interesting that we started off talking about high expectations and that sometimes I think we don't honor individuals by placing them in boxes or assuming that they can't do something. So having high expectations doesn't mean unrealistic.
Yeah.
Perfection obviously is an unrealistic expectation, but I think
don't you think that's what we're doing in most traditional education? We're expecting perfection, and we've defined perfection as this quadrant in the rubric. We've defined it as this score, as this standard.
But also I would
kind of built around that idea.
But we've also said that
of this gross version of perfection.
True. But we've also said that we don't necessarily allow for high enough expectations of kids and we limit what they can do. So I think I think it's, as you said at the very beginning, we need to, in a school or in a district, have those conversations amongst the staff, see where we are. And I mean, you could even do this as a group inquiry activity and figure out where we can align better so that we don't limit kids, but then that we also look at, are we expecting something that they haven't really learned just because we've delivered it? So there are all of these pieces and parts that are this fun jumble puzzle to put together. But if you don't have those conversations up front, then everybody's expectations are going to be different. And the kids are going to be the ones who can't live up to any of them.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder if that is some of the crisis that kids feel right now. You know, like we talk about how anxiety and depression are so high or at higher levels than we've ever seen in kids. Like we call it literally the anxious generation. Mm-hmm. And you're like, well, why is that? And is it because we have unrealistic expectations that we've said are realistic? Like we've led kids to believe they're realistic expectations. And then we've just labeled it as, well, we just have really high expectations for you.
Yeah, I think there's a conflict in what is an expectation versus we're just going to make something harder and call it rigorous or that we're more elite or it really, if you're setting up your school to meet the needs of your best students or this we hear in education all the time too, if you're setting up your school for the students you wish you have instead of the kids you actually have, right? That's not to say you shouldn't have an idea of what your students should look like after they've been with you, but you have to meet the needs of the kids you have, not the ones you wish you had.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I think that that's where the cognitive dissonance comes in for so many kids is they're looking at these unrealistic high expectations. I used quotes there. And they're that would make me anxious. How am I supposed to measure up to all of that? Yeah. That feels impossible. Like that puts me in an impossible situation. And it's when it's not seeing me in my own learning and it's not seeing what I'm actually capable of in this moment. And it's not giving me the scaffold and the guidance and the support to actually meet those unrealistic expectations. Like, yeah, that does feel hopeless. That does give me anxiety. That does feel really, really hard.
I think you could add to that the fact that so many adults and kids believe that, well, you have to go through school, it's a requirement, but most of the stuff that you're going to learn isn't going to apply to your life anyway. And I'm like, well, as it's delivered and expected, I would say that's true. If you help kids to learn to make the connections, if you don't isolate the content areas, if you meet the kids' emotional needs and social needs, and then they also see that their work has purpose, because I truly believe that they're an anxious generation, not because of social media or anything like that. It's more about that they are struggling with their purpose, their place in the world, the uncertainty of everything around them, because everybody's anxious about that. I don't think you can just say that's the kids. When you have this much uncertainty in your life, that makes everybody anxious.
And we have higher expectations, meaning higher is the wrong word. We have more rigorous. We have unrealistic, enhanced expectations of, well, now at kindergarten, you need to be a fluent reader.
Right.
And it's like, well,
that's not developmentally
you can't
appropriate.
just keep raising the bar and have it be completely not developmentally appropriate. Of course, that's going to create kids who are worried about their academics and are worried about, am I ever going to catch up? And am I always going to be behind?
Right.
And I'm just stupid. Like, of course, that's what the end result is going to be, because that's what you've set up.
When I was in school in K through 12, those kind of worries didn't really hit until 8th grade or 9th grade, when they started when the teachers and your parents started to put pressure on you. What I found as I grew up, that year of student got younger and younger every year. And then once I was teaching at Anastasis, we saw 2nd and 3rd graders coming to us in a panic that they didn't know how to do certain things. And then they were going to struggle in high school, and then they wouldn't get into the right college. When you have a 7-year-old worried about what college they're going to get into, that is a huge problem of the adults and the culture around them, not the kid.
And when the kindergartners are so worried that they can't read.
Yeah.
And you're, even coming into kindergarten, and they'd be like, I can't read yet. I don't know how to read. I'm behind. And you're like, behind what? No, you're not.
No, you're not. Fine. You're fine. Yeah.
You're fine. And some of that is, parental pressure, or the sibling read at a very young age. And so the expectation is I should be able to, like, some of it came just accidentally.
Right.
That pressure came accidentally through, I saw somebody else who can do it, or my friend can do it and I can't. But again, when school looks like a place of comparison, it's
and
easier
competition.
for that to take hold, and competition.
Yep.
It's easier for that to take hold, where it's not to say it never happened at Anastasis. We still had kids who, would start to recognize, like, it seems like everybody else can do this and I can't, and it's still a struggle for me. I think the difference is in how they were supported through that moment of feeling that way, rather than it being highlighted because they were being compared, and that competition was there artificially through grades or whatever.
And that's, what we've said, your expectations can be high, but when you start introducing comparison and competition as a means to motivate, it is doing the exact opposite of what you think it's doing. I'm not saying that all competition is bad. I don't agree with that. I'm a very competitive person, but I do think that the way that we've made it look in school has been very detrimental. And again, as this race to the top, and
it's not helpful for learning.
And again, it goes back to the bell curve. You have winners and losers, and why can't, in education and learning, why can't everybody be a winner? I'm not talking about participation trophies and ribbons. I'm saying, why can't I work to make sure everyone is successful? It doesn't need to be that some people are just going to slip through the cracks. That's unacceptable to me.
That's an unacceptable. Yeah, it is unacceptable.
It doesn't need to be that way.
And again, high expectations for us. We had high expectations for every single child, but it was appropriate to that child. And our goal was forward progress and growth for that child. So, and when we had those conversations as whole groups, and we were pointing to and celebrating each other's learning and celebrating out loud, like, that word choice was brilliant. Everybody in the class benefited from that, because it became a moment of collective intelligence where all ships were rising, because we heard that together and we pointed it out and noticed it together. And there was always something to notice in every single student's work. There was never a time where we were like, well, there's nothing to celebrate here because it's just trash. Like, that never happened.
I do remember a couple of times when kids did some subpar work that I knew that they were better. But I didn't wait to the very last minute to tell them that either. There were some kids that purposefully just didn't do the work. And I was like, okay, well, the natural consequence has to happen there. So they're going to present whatever they have. But if I saw a group of kids really kind of like falling apart, or just kind of phoning it in, it was okay. I could say to them, again, we had a relationship where they knew that they could trust me to help them along the way if they needed it. but also that I was going to hold them accountable. And I think that there's a way to hold kids accountable in a trustworthy way, in a beneficial way that's not going to just knock them down a peg for the sake of knocking them down. I can say, you know what, I expected more out of you than this. I know you can do better work. Tell me what's going on. That's why are you doing less than you normally would do?
Well, or you could say, like, I can see you need a break right now.
Sure. Yep.
Do you need a break right now? Right. You could see those. And because of the way we operated, you could give them that ability to, like, great, go have a break, come back when you can. We also knew the kids well enough to know, like, you don't feel confident enough to start this. And so you're just not doing it because you don't feel confident. So what do you need help with?
How can I help you get started?
Get started and go.
Yeah.
And that applied to a lot a kids. I mean, back to that executive functioning. Sometimes it wasn't that they didn't want to do the work. It wasn't that they were being lazy. It was avoidance because I don't know how to start.
Or I'm so overwhelmed and overstimulated by somebody tapping a pen in the room that I can't start. We also had the opportunity to show grace for human moments. We had families who were going through some huge life changes every year of our school, right? And when you see a family that's in crisis or whatever, something traumatic for another term, knowing that maybe is going to impact the kid, of course it's going to impact the kid 100%. So maybe that kid is not going to do their best work this time. And I can say, I know what they're capable of. They're giving me some good work, even though it's not up to the level that I would expect from them. And I'm going to be okay with that. And because I know what they're going through right now, allowing the humanity in me to be present for the people who needed it. Again, it's a learning experience. Do I already know that this kid can write a project or a book report or whatever it happens to be? Yes. Have they already proven that? Yes. So do I need them to show up 100% on this one? Or is it okay if they bring in 60% today? Because that's all they can really afford to give. And you know what? That's good.
That's in the tank.
Yep.
Yeah. That feels like a good place to end.
I think so.
Because my tank's
Same.
emptying.
Same.
Well, on that note, onward.
Onward, ho.
Hey, Michelle, where else can people find you online?
I blog at avenue4learning.com, and the 4 is the actual number 4, not the word 4, avenue4learning.com.
And you can find me at dreamsofeducation.wordpress.com, which is my original blog. You can also find me at ktsplace.com, which is where I share a bunch of resources and kind of projects that we're currently working on. And we are both on Blue Sky at the moment, but not as active as we once were on our favorite bird. Come find us and connect with us in other places, and we look forward to connecting with you.